What do you think was Ronaldo's motivation for giving that interview?
I think he's obviously, over a period of many, many months, stored up, had a pent-up frustration. Obviously, he's not done any interview at all this season for any broadcaster, whether it be Sky Sports or BT Sport. Obviously, United are nearly on every single week. And I suspect he's been asked to do an interview after every game, every single week, and he's chosen not to speak. And obviously through that, he's felt as though he's needed to come out and say his piece and obviously get off his chest what's been bugging him.
Do you think he's misjudged this situation, though? Because did he probably go into it thinking that the United fans will be onside?
I don't know what he thought in respect of what the United fans would think. And to be fair, I think that I would never criticise a football player. I've called for many, many years for football players to be open, to be independent thinking, and to come out and speak their minds and not to be sort of micromanaged from within an inch of their lives by PR teams. And I can't think that's happened here. I can't think that any PR advisor would have told him to go and do what he's done. I think that he would have done this off his own back with his own strength of character and personality. I think there was probably a different way to do it, but I think that's maybe from the club side and from Cristiano's side. You know, when I had that debate in the studio after the Chelsea game 3 or 4 weeks ago with Roy Keane and with Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank and Dave Jones, I urged Manchester United and Cristiano to come together that week because it was obvious that the actual relationship was failing or had failed, and that navigate a pathway to January or to the World Cup whereby they had basically created a truce. You know, exits don't have to happen this way if both sides are proactive and mature. So I think I'm disappointed that that meeting doesn't seem to have happened. Cristiano hasn't been controlled or managed. It doesn't look like Cristiano, to be fair, on his side of things, has also reached out to the club and open communication line. So I'd say on that side of things that, you know, it's ended up in this what would be quite unsavoury situation whereby it looks like Cristiano's going to end this period of his reign at Manchester United in not as great a, I suppose, feeling as it should be, which, you know, he's one of the greatest players ever to play the game in the world, and he's certainly one of Manchester United's greatest ever players. So it's obviously sometimes difficult. You know, I remember when players left Manchester United when I was there, and it didn't always end in the right way. And it never felt right whilst I was at the club, and it still doesn't feel right now as a sort of Manchester United fan. Somebody that I played with needs to leave the club in this way, or that the club need to end it in this way.
There's that phrase, nothing surprises you in football, but is there any way back for him at United?
No, and I don't think he wants a way back. I mean, he wouldn't have done this interview if he wanted a way back. I think this interview, to be fair, was one that he knew would bring about the headlines that it has and would bring his end of his Manchester United career. Now, from a club point of view, I think that the interesting thing is now Cristiano has obviously said what he said. He's come out and basically criticised whether it be the young players at the club, whether it be Eric Ten Hag, the owners, the board. So if you do that in any business, you know, if you criticise your line manager, if you criticise your owners, your board, your executive, then there's obviously no employment going to be there for you in the future. So I'm, to be fair, at this moment in time, wondering what Manchester United are doing, because the reality of it is they know they have to terminate Cristiano's contract, or else they basically open up a precedent so that any player can come and criticise them in the future. So, you know, I agree with some of the things that Cristiano has said. And many Manchester United fans will agree with many of the things that Cristiano has said. But the reality of it is, if you're an employee within a business and you say those things, then your employment has to terminate. And Manchester United, have no doubt, have to do that in the next few days. And Cristiano probably wants that as well. But it didn't need to end like that. They could have come together a few weeks ago and navigated a smooth pathway through what potentially could have been choppy seas to the shore. But it's not happened. They've both basically gone, it looks like, backed themselves into a corner.
Gary, we saw those pictures of what appeared to be a rather frosty handshake between Cristiano Ronaldo and Bruno Fernandes. In the United dressing room, will the players be disappointed?
Deep down, I think the players will be very disappointed. To be fair, it's actually where my criticism came from of Cristiano 4 weeks ago. I actually said that I didn't really care about his relationship with the manager. I think I've seen players and managers, we've all seen players and managers fall out over the years. But one thing you don't do, particularly in the upbringing that Cristiano's had at Manchester United, is that you stay strong in the dressing room and you stay there for your group and you make sure you're with your teammates through thick and thin, substitute, no substitute, win, lose, injury, no injury. you make sure that you're with your teammates very much to the end. And when he obviously, for the second time, he left the ground before the end of a match, that wasn't the first time he'd done it. It was the second time. That wasn't the professional, I suppose, behaviour that you would expect of Cristiano Ronaldo, knowing sort of the upbringing that he's had at that club and what he would know is the right and the wrong things to do. So from that point of view, it was indefensible once he went and left the ground for the second time. You know, I think he'd been better off if he had a problem with Erik ten Hag at the end of that match, having it out in the dressing room in front of the players, shaking the players' hands, then getting into his car and leaving. So at the end of the day, Cristiano has dipped below his standards in the last few weeks, months. He'll realise that maybe today, or he'll realise that in many years' time, that ultimately he won't enjoy this period in his life. And it happens to us all, where we have these moments of dips where we don't quite, to be fair, behave or do the things that we always want to do. And I think he's going through one of those moments. And when I saw him on the interview, I have to say, you know, he is a sensitive, quite vulnerable character, Cristiano. For all his greatness and his special talent, he is quite a sensitive individual, as to be fair, most people are deep down. And, you know, he looked a little bit like a lost sheep at times, I thought, when he was speaking in that interview. And the reality of it is he's done it. You know, I think you have to always applaud someone who comes out and speaks their mind. I can never, ever criticise. I've been calling for him to come out and speak his mind. You know, I've wanted to hear from him for the last 3 months, because he's left other players and his manager at the club to come out and answer the difficult questions for him. But at least now he's answered them all, which I think is, to be fair, a positive out of this, if there is one.
He said that he doesn't respect Erik ten Hag. Just on the manager, how do you think he's handled this situation up until that interview? And what do you think Erik ten Hag will do after it?
I think Erik ten Hag, and I've said this before, has handled, to be fair, a very difficult first 6 months at United perfectly well. I don't think he could have done anything different. Cristiano's a monster of a player, a monster of a character with a massive reach. And he's been in a bit of a difficult position that, to be fair, if he publicly takes him on, he's probably not going to win that. So he's privately, I think, probably got problems with Cristiano. In fact, we know he has, because he keeps leaving him out and keeps obviously doing the things he's doing. But from a point of view, I think Cristiano Ronaldo and Erik ten Hag, the executive, the sporting directors, the owners, they should have got in a room a few weeks ago and said, look, we don't respect each other, we don't like each other, we don't want this to continue moving forwards, but let's end it properly. They've not done that. There's not been proactive leadership here. They've basically shied away from it, thinking that it's going to basically be okay. And that doesn't happen in football, particularly when you're dealing with such a big character and special player like Cristiano Ronaldo. He's not going to accept that. He's not just going to sit there and think that he's going to be bashed from pillar to post. I do think that there is an element of, and it happened when I was playing as well, maybe even happened with me at times, where when you're a football player, you do suffer from a little bit of paranoia sometimes, where you think that everybody's against you. Not everyone's against Cristiano Ronaldo. In fact, he's much loved in this country, in this city of Manchester. And to be fair, most people who speak about him, even if they're offering some what would be criticism of him, they still deep down will have massive respect and enormous respect for him and love him as a player and what he's done for the game. But Cristiano at the moment looks like someone who, to be fair, feels like the world's against him, that everybody doesn't like him. And it's not like that. It doesn't have to be like that. So even now, the club need to reach out to Cristiano, to his advisors, and vice versa, and navigate a way that this ends very quickly, because it's becoming more unsavoury by the day, and there's no need for it to be like that.
Gary, you say that the world isn't against him as much as he claims. He feels that you're personally against him. He claims you've spoken about him in order to get attention for yourself. What did you make of that, and what are your feelings towards him now?
It's not true what he said, but the reality of it is, I think that all's fair in love and war. You know, I know that I live in the game of criticism and that I have to accept it back, and I get plenty of it back. I love all my teammates that I played with, including Cristiano. And to be fair, the disappointment I have in the last few months is that he dropped below a standard that I know he has, and I know that he's set previously in his behaviour. And he'll realise that one day in 10, 15 years, as I have at many times during my life. You know, it's a little bit wrong at the time. I suspect he's a little bit uncomfortable at this moment in time in terms of the fallout of what's happened, because deep down he's a sensitive, good human being. And he's just, at the end of the day, not handling probably the latter part of his career as easily as he could do, or as well as he could do, because he's got that mentality that I can't describe, that people have of his ilk, that just is I say it's a monster mentality that basically means they cannot accept things going against them or obstacles being put in the way. And they do think everybody's against them. But the reality of it is, it isn't like that. I'm not against Cristiano Ronaldo. In fact, far from it. I couldn't have any more admiration for him. I couldn't have any more respect for him of what he's done. He's the greatest football player that I've ever seen. And to be fair, he's the most talented football player that I ever played with at Manchester United. And that continues to be the case. I won't change that. And I remember what Cristiano has said about me in the past, to be fair, when I reflect back. The reality of it is, these comments that Cristiano's made, fair, express them. I want him to speak more, because I think that, to be fair, as a leader and as a great player, he should speak more. I think he should have been out there this season when his teammates were finding it difficult speaking for them at the end of matches and not sending out other people. So from that point of view, it is what it is. You know, I saw Cristiano's comments on social media yesterday, or a couple of days ago, and I accept that all's fair in love and war. We live in the game of the media. We accept that we have to have criticism back. Jurgen Klopp last week criticised me, and sometimes he may think I criticise him. That's, to me, part of the game. It's the world that we live in. But from my point of view, I live on television with people at Sky every single day. We have these huge sort of arguments and debates, but we shake each other's hand at the end of it. And I would still shake Cristiano's hand. He may not shake mine, but I still would shake his hand, because to me, I don't carry things forward. It's just something that, if I don't do in my life.
You did say earlier that Ronaldo did make some salient points in that interview as well, things that you probably agree with. He mentioned one of them was that the club's stagnating since the Sir Alex Ferguson era. Does he have a point there?
Well, I've made that point stronger than anybody in the last couple of years. And it's the first time I think I've heard someone say it who's been in the club as a player. So in that sense, I suppose there'll be many Manchester United fans, including myself, will to be fair, welcome his honesty, because it's quite clear that the club has, you know, whether it be with the stadium, whether it be with the training ground, whether it be with other things, football project, that, you know, there's no doubt the club has suffered badly and has failed in the last 8 to 10 years. But Cristiano joined the club 18 months ago knowing that. He knew that the club had stagnated. He knew the club was in a difficult position. He knew the club was falling well below the standards that it had set previously. And Cristiano was here to drag those standards up and work with those young players and try and bring them forward. You know, I was disappointed when he criticised the young players and said that, you know, players aren't what they used to be, because that's what people used to say about us. That's what sometimes people said about us when we came through in the 1990s. It's what 40, 50-year-old people, late 30-year-old people say about the young 16, 17, 18-year-olds. It's not true. It's not true. Every time's different. If you speak to someone who basically came, you know, I speak to my grandparents when I was growing up, and they used to say, you don't know you're born, you don't know how lucky you are. They're things that all our parents and our grandparents have said, but the reality of it is we don't choose to be born in this era, which is a social media era. It's very different. And I actually think football players nowadays are more resilient than they were 20 years ago, because of the criticism they get on social media, the fact that ultimately the scrutiny is on them. There's 50 cameras in the face every single minute of their on-the-field lives and off-the-field lives. And to be fair, we used to be able to go out and have a pint and do what we wanted without ever being filmed or pitched or cameraed, and certainly wasn't social media. So the scrutiny that the current generation of player is under, in terms of analysis, in terms of punditry, in terms of scrutiny of their off-field activity, in terms of their everyday lives, is far greater than it was 25 years ago. So I think these lads have their own element of toughness in them that I've seen in the last few years with some of the teammates like Marcus Rashford, who's taken on huge political and social fights and won. People like Raheem Sterling. There are others like Jordan Henderson at Liverpool who've set up charities and who've done big things during COVID. You know, these lads have, to be fair, I think demonstrated the resilience of a modern English player, a British player, and actually there are international players like Juan Mata, who set up the 1% of his wage a few years ago. You know, these players are demonstrating great leadership, great qualities that I've seen, to be fair. The Premier League's the best standard I've ever seen it. And to be fair, I'm well placed to comment on that because I played in the Premier League with Cristiano 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And I watch the Premier League now, and it's better today than it was then. So I think it's a little bit unfair to criticise the young players at Manchester United, and to be fair, just generally the way in which footballs are perceived, because that's not true. I don't believe it to be true. And those young players at Manchester United, we were very lucky when we came through at United that we had great leaders. So when Cristiano came through at Manchester United, they had a great leadership group that looked after him, that comforted him, that lived with his, you know, on the pitch, immaturity, eccentricness that he had at that time, and basically work with him, with the coaching team, to make him, to be fair, as good as he possibly could be. And that's what these young players at Manchester United need today. They need leadership, they need guidance, they need information. And I don't think that's always happened in the last 18 months when I've been watching the club.
Those young players in the current squad, Gary, do you think that these comments will have particularly hurt someone like Alejandro Garnacho? Scores his first Premier League goal in the last minute against Fulham. It should be an amazing moment for him. And then he hears these comments from someone that he idolises in Cristiano Ronaldo. I
don't know whether Cristiano's comments were directly at Garnacho, to be fair. So I wouldn't want to put that, that's only Cristiano would know that. I don't think they were, maybe. One thing I would say is that the young boy scored that goal at Fulham on Sunday, and it wasn't a similar goal to the one that Cristiano scored all those years ago at Fulham, but it was in the same area of the pitch. It felt of quite a significant moment in a young player's career, as that goal was for Cristiano that day. I would have probably just rung Piers Morgan up and said to Piers, look, just pull it back to tomorrow. Let's let the young kid have his night tonight. Let's let the young kid have the headlines tomorrow. I did think that, to be fair, was unwise, personally. I always think of it, I still think like a player, you see, and I'm in a dressing room with a group of people, and I lived in a dressing room with people whereby there were definitely fights at time with the management or with the club, and those things were happening whilst I was in the dressing room. But we always, to be fair, had each other's backs internally, and we always looked after each other internally, and we always made sure we stayed together internally. So I think on Sunday night, his teammates had just scored a last-minute winner. So his team had just scored a last-minute winner. The young boy had just scored a hero goal in a great moment, and it probably would have been better for Cristiano just to put back his announcement of his interview to Monday night off the back of that. But the reality is, it's gone out. It is what it is, and I suppose that I'm hoping Cristiano chose to do that interview himself, and he wasn't guided to do that by his PR team. I'm hoping that he has got that, independent thought to go and do it. It would deem to me be something that I think he probably has done, which is, it's good. I wouldn't want. I hate the idea of modern football players. I do think are fantastic, producing some great football, being sort of micromanaged within an inch of their lives and not being able to speak openly and criticise people. If I criticise someone on television, I'm happy for the player to come back and have a pop at me. I think that's the way it should be. I don't think they need to be wrapped up in cotton wool all the time. I think they can be more expressive and more open with their feelings. So I'm not going to criticise Cristiano for doing that interview, because I think, to be fair, I want more players to do those types of interviews. To do those interviews. But I think maybe he could have timed it better in respect of the release after the boy scored the goal, obviously, on Sunday, because that was an important moment for that kid.
Finally, and very quickly, Gary, thanks for your patience with this. What next for him? Where do you see him going?
I don't know where he goes. I hope that he goes somewhere that's going to accept, and he's going to accept that. He needs to go somewhere that's going to accept the way in which he wants the rest of his career to play out. Because if you look at what happened at Juventus at the end, and if you look at what's happening at Manchester United, one can be, to be fair, just happen. One thing can just happen, but when it happens twice, it becomes a pattern. So he needs to choose a club that suits Cristiano's end of his career. That means that he's, I suppose, got a level of control, because that's what he wants in terms of his position. He obviously is someone who wants to be playing every single week, irrespective of whether the team are better for it or whether he's better for it. And I think he needs to choose somewhere that suits the end of his career.
Sorry, I'm just going to have to interrupt you there. Thanks so much for your time. Thank you very, very much indeed.
Was that bad?
You were brilliant.